ba 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 ba. So today we're going to continue talking about embellishment techniques, and today we're going to be talking about hammer-ons and pull-offs. Now, funny enough, these techniques are done very differently, but they have very similar sounds. And the reason why we introduce them together is because hammer-ons are only used going up the fretboard, and pull-offs are only used going down the fretboard. So when we worked on slides, we could upslide and downslide, and we'd go both ways. But with these techniques, we really want to learn them together so that you can traverse the fretboard more easily. But let's go ahead and talk about first the hammer-on technique, which I actually think is the harder one between the two. But let's go ahead and break it down a little bit. What we're going to start with is a similar thing we did with the slides. We're going to start with fret 3 on the A string, and we're going to do a hammer-on to fret 5 on the A string. Now, unlike the slide where we just slid that finger into position, right, where we use the same finger for both, this time we're going to be using a different finger, and we're going to be using our ring finger in this case. And this is what it looks like, just so that you can hear and see it. Now, how we actually do this, well, we want to think of a different instrument for a moment. We want to think of a piano, which seems a little weird. But if you ever open up a piano and you look inside, what you'll notice is that inside a piano, there are a whole bunch of little hammers that are there to strike strings, which is kind of cool. If you haven't looked at one before, I highly recommend just going on YouTube or something and looking it up. But it's a really good way to start to visualize what it is we're going to be doing with the ukulele, because we're going to actually hammer our finger as if it's one of those little hammers inside of a piano striking the string. The trick is the angle. When we look at the finger, we're using our ring finger, and we're going to use the tip of this finger, right? This point here. We don't want to use the bottom fleshy part or the sides. We want to use the tip of the finger. And as we do the hammer-on, we want to make sure that this knuckle right here is bent. We don't want to have it recessed like this or something. That's a recipe for disaster. Have that little bend. You're going to play the first note, which is the 3 on the A, with your index finger there. After you've let it ring for a moment, you're then going to smack that ring finger onto the 5th fret at that perpendicular angle, keeping that finger bent just like so. And make sure that you're going right into that fret wire. Now, when I say into it, I don't necessarily mean on top of it. I mean right before it, kind of going up into that area. If your hammer-ons sound like this at first, that's normal. This is part of the progress with it. You want to make sure you're really getting to be perpendicular to the string and getting that nice crease in your knuckle to get that good tone. Again, I think this is the harder one. But if you think of like a little piano hammer hitting the string, or just imagine a hammer hitting a nail. If the hammer is hitting the nail and it misses the nail and goes off, it's not driving the nail in there, right? It needs to be both with force, but also accurate. And in many ways, the accuracy is more important. So if you're trying to do this too hard and you're going like this, and you're not getting a good sound, that's usually because your accuracy is lacking. You want to make sure you're getting right into that area. Odds are good it's either harder than you think you have to do it or softer than you think you have to do it, which I know sounds crazy, but whatever you're doing it right now, try doing it much less hard and then try doing it way harder, and you might get a good gauge of where you were on that spectrum. I've had students who are trying to, push so much harder than they need to, and then I've had others that don't realize that you gotta hammer it on there. Another trick to this technique is making sure that you let the first note breathe a little bit. A lot of times people try to do this, and they get that weird stunted sound. And the reason for that's really simple. They're playing the note and immediately doing the hammer-on. And you hear that doesn't sound good. Let that note breathe for a moment before you then take that ring finger and hammer it to that 5th fret. Now, hammer-ons are more flexible than slides in some ways because you don't have to move immediately adjacent, right? You just have to have the fingers spread. But it also makes them a lot more limited because you can't just go from 3 and go up to 12 with something like a hammer-on. That's not really recommended. So usually what you want to do is get practice with your hammer-ons with all of your different fingers in kind of different positions. So you could do the hammer-on from 3 to 5 like we're doing. You could also do a hammer-on from like 3 to 4, which will sound a little funny because we've been doing the 3 to 5, but If you don't like how that sounds, you can move down and do it 2 to 3 instead. So right there, I'm playing with my index, and then I'm hammering on with that middle finger, the exact same logic with that finger at that nice creased angle, treating it like a little hammerhead, hitting the nail. We also want to practice it with our pinky, which frankly is not fun. This finger is not very good, and it needs to be when we're doing these things. I like to practice that with 2 on the index there, and practice hammering on to 5 with the pinky. This is the hardest one yet. And the main reason is most people don't have very much finger strength. I know, doesn't that sound funny? Or pinky strength specifically here. But keeping that pinky bent at this angle actually requires some strengthening through practice. And it's pretty remarkable how much your, ukulele playing can be like lifting weights for your pinky. But that's essentially what we want to just be practicing, and be very gracious with ourselves if this isn't coming quickly. This is a technique that's not just how much time you spent with it, but over what amount of time. Meaning, if you practice it for 5 minutes a day for the next, 7 days, that is going to be more valuable to you than if you just did 35 minutes today and that's it, right? It's much better to practice this a little bit at a time, over lots of time, and in the weeks to months that you practice, you'll start to really get it comfortable. And it's a fun technique. I love hammer-ons. The problem with a hammer-on is it doesn't create sound very well. So what I mean by this is when you play the first note and then you do the hammer-on, it's very hard for the hammer-on to make more sound happen than the initial note, right? So keep that in mind. It's tough to make a hammer-on sound like more because it's not creating new sound. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because we have another technique that we're working on today, which is called the pull-off, which is the sister to the hammer-on. Now, the difference between the two is the pull-off does create sound. It is one that you can do without playing the strings and still get a good tone. So when you're doing hammer-ons and pull-offs, you just want to kind of keep this in mind. Pull-offs give you this kind of net positive in sound, while hammer-ons are giving you a net negative, and you want to try to balance them. But let's go ahead and look at pull-offs and talk a little bit about the technique that's done. We're going to start taking our ring finger here, place it on the 5th fret of the A string again. Take your index finger and place it here on the 3rd fret of the A string, and you want to simultaneously be fretting both of these strings at once, or both of these frets. And what you're going to do is you're going to play and have that ring finger be playing the note, and then you're going to pull off the finger to create that sound. Now, the trick is, it's not what it sounds like. When I say pull off, people do this. You hear how there's no sound there? A little bit, but it's not much. That would be like the hammer-on. It's not creating sound. Here's the trick. I'm going to take my ring finger and I'm going to physically pluck the string with my ring finger, just like my other hand plays down here. I'm going to actually use my index finger as a base, not move my index finger at all. And I'm going to move my ring finger down, pulling the string as it goes. And as I come off, I'm coming off in the same way that I would try to pluck the string to an extent. I'm trying to physically move the string. So it looks something like this. So as I do that, you'll see that my pluck kind of comes downward and a little bit inward towards my body. Just a bit. And it looks like this. Now, if this hurts the tip of your finger, that's good. That means you're doing it right. It's one that really requires some callus to be developed on the finger. And a callus is just, when your finger gets tough from being used so much with this. And so if it's hurting a little bit as you're doing this, that's okay. Go back to the hammer-ons, to the slides, or other things, and just kind of come back to it as you're practicing. You definitely don't want to hurt your finger. But that's the big trick to the pull-off, is you're physically pulling the string off as you do this. Another thing that you'll notice I sometimes will do is I'll kind of angle my hand a little bit so that my nails are facing my shoulder. And that just gives me a little bit more torque with this. So that's another thing that you can try as you're practicing this. Let's go and try it with some other fingers too. Let's use our middle and our index fingers. So take your index and place it on fret 2 of the A string. And then take your middle and place it on fret 3 of the A string. Play the 3 and then pull off to the 2. This is much harder. The reason for this is as you go down the fretboard, the string gets stronger. What I mean is the tension that the string is under is more as you're going down to the open strings there. And so it's harder to do a pull off here because you just don't have a good angle with this finger. If you can do a pull-off from 3 to 2, you can do a pull-off pretty much anywhere. So that's a good place to kind of practice. You can also practice doing things like the pinky here on 5, pulling off to 2. Once again, the pinky is the worst finger of the bunch, or at least the weakest, and it's really hard to do this, just like it was with the hammer-on, but with practice, it's a worthwhile thing to do. Now, what's funny about this is hammer-ons and pull-offs are used in conjunction, and really it's very simple to know which one you should be using for what. It's depending on what direction you're moving with whatever you're playing, right? So if you're moving up the fretboard, which again, this is up. I know it's confusing, right? But it's going up in numbers, as you can see by my fretboard here, and it's going up in pitch, even though it is, you know, from a gravity point of view, in fact, going down. It is going up the fretboard for those other points of view. So as we go up the fretboard, we use hammer-ons because that allows us to go upward. When we're going down the fretboard, we use pull-offs because that allows us to move down. And to show this, I've done another little etude here, and I'm going to do a screen share. So give me one moment as I set that up. We're going to share this screen right here and share. All right. So if you guys can see this, if you wouldn't mind just giving me a thumbs up, that way I know that you can see the tab. So if you look at the top here, this is what we did in our last session, the blues slides and the slides etude. And now what we're going to be focusing on is this next part here, which says blues, hammer-ons, and pull-offs. So to start, when we look at the first 2 bars of this, you can see that we're moving up the fretboard. We're going from 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 10, 10 to 12. Remember, when we go up the fretboard, we use hammer-ons. So what we can try to do with this is we can take our index finger, place it on the 3rd fret. We're going to play that, and we're going to do a hammer-on to 5 on the A string. Now the difficulty here is if you read music and you're reading this correctly, these are quarter notes. So that means we're kind of going 1 and 2 and. That's really hard to do, right? It's hard to get that sound to sustain through it. So don't pay too much attention to the rhythm markers here. It's okay if you do it a little bit faster to get more comfortable with the hammer-on. It's less important to get the actual quarter note value here and more just important to make them an even value. Now, when we go to the 5 to 7, the problem is if we do this, how do I go up to 7 here? Well, I could use my pinky, but that's getting a little bit dicey. So what you do is you have to move. You take that 5 that you just played with the ring and you slide your index up now to that 5. You play that and you hammer on now to fret 7. So the first measure goes something like this. And then from here it goes up to 7, same deal. We're gonna move our index finger up here. But then it goes to fret 10. And fret 10 you could do with your ring finger, but you see how it's a little bit of an awkward step, right? It's going to be those 3 frets between it, but we only have the 1 finger here instead of 2. So the ideal method would be to hammer on with the pinky finger. Now, as I mentioned before, it's really hard to hammer on with the pinky. This is a very difficult thing to do. So if you're struggling with this and the pinky isn't working, that's okay. That's something to practice towards. And you can use your ring finger instead if that's easier. But then from this 10, we're going to go up to 12, so we can slide that index finger up to 10, and we do a hammer-on onto the ring finger 12th fret. You'll notice it gets harder to do hammer-ons as you go up the fretboard, and that's just because there's less space for the string to vibrate, so it just makes it a harder sell. But that's kind of the point of the exercise. As you go up, it gets a little bit harder. But it can sound really nice if you get comfortable. Now, as we move on from here, the next step is going to be doing pull-offs, going down the fretboard. We're going to start at fret 12, and then we'll pull off to 10. The way we do this is we hold the 2 fingers on. So ring finger is going to be here on the 12th fret of the A string, index here on the 10th fret of the A string. We're going to play that 12, physically pluck the string as we're going to 10. Then we move this index finger now down to fret 7. Now, it's funny because we're looking at fret 10, right? But we have to look at where we're pulling off to when we're reading tab. It doesn't matter what the first note is of a pull-off, it matters what the second is. And so if you look at me kind of highlight it here, even though we look at this 10 first, we need to see that 7 and know that, oh, okay, so I'm gonna play the 10 maybe with my pinky or my ring finger, and I'm going to pull off to fret 7 on the A. So even though playing this note first is right, we have to look ahead to know how we set it up. And that's a big trick to embellishments, is always looking ahead to know where it is you're going. And then we move down to 7 and 5. We do a pull off from 7 down to 5. And then we move down to 3 and we do 5 to 3. And if you want to do a little extra credit, you can play the 3 and pull off open to the A string, which can sound pretty cool. And it's one of the nice things about this technique. You can actually do it with the open strings too. So you can play 3, pull off to open. You could also hammer back on to 3 if you want to. And that's how songs get written sometimes, when you do something like... It's using hammer-ons or pull-offs in this case with open strings, but that's something for another day. So that's our little blues etude, and the reason we call it the blues etude is because if you play along with the blues, you can do these little tricks and they sound really nice, especially when you combine them with slides. But we'll talk more about combining the two in just a moment. So now what we're going to look at is this little etude that I wrote, similar to the one that we did before, starting right here. And it's going to start with just a very basic hammer-on. We're going to play 3 and hammer on to 5. So we strum through a C chord here, using your index finger on the 3rd fret of the A string. And we're going to do a hammer-on to fret 5 on the A string. So I'm strumming through with my thumb over all 4 strings. And then I'm doing that hammer-on from the 3 to the 5 with that ring finger. And then I'm going to play the 3 on the A string again. So it's just... Now the next part, we're going to take this index finger, we're going to move it down to 1 on the E string. We're going to play 3 on the A with our ring finger here. So this is that little F add 9 chord we've talked about in a couple of these other lessons, but we're adding this 3rd fret. We're going to strum through all 4 strings, and then we're going to pull off this ring finger to open on the A. This is a little bit more tricky, right? Because now we have this index finger here on the fretboard as well. So we have to make sure we're getting really good crisp finger angles to make sure nothing vibrates into each other, right? So we do that little pull off there. And then what we could do is we could place our ring finger back on the 3rd fret of the E string and strum through our G, C, and E to kind of finish that measure. So that second half looks something like this. And so this whole little first part of the etude sounds and looks something like this. It's a nice little sound that you can just kind of practice with. You don't have to worry too much about the timing as much as you are the techniques, and trying different timings with those techniques can really help build more of a familiarity with them. But then we go on to this next measure here, and this looks insane, doesn't this? Like, this looks actually crazy. What is going on here? Well, remember when I said that hammer-ons are kind of a net negative, but pull-offs are kind of a net positive? What that really means is as long as you have a pull-off and a hammer-on both present, you should be able to make both of the sounds. So what we do here is we play through a C chord, and then we hammer on to 5, which makes some sound go away, but then we pull off back to 3, which makes some new sound, and then we hammer on to 5, and then we pull off to 3, and then we hammer on to 5, and then we just play it with 3, which is kind of crazy. There's a lot going on there. But with practice, it sounds something like this. And you can hear that I'm sustaining that sound, right? You can hear that the hammer-ons aren't as loud, and the pull-offs are a little bit louder just because they're creating more of that sound. And as you get better with this technique, you can start to dial down the pull-offs a little bit so they're a little bit softer, but still getting a good tone, so that you get that more buttery sound of them being equal. Right? But for now, it's okay if your pull-offs sound like this. Because what you're doing is you're building that muscle memory and that familiarity to get those fingers into place. All right? And so that whole second measure looks something like this. And it doesn't matter if you do the right number here. You could cut it in half, you could double it. This is just random notes on a tab for all intents and purposes. What it's doing is teaching you to do both the hammer-ons and the pull-offs together, because that's where the magic really happens with ukulele playing. And in my own personal playing, I use these techniques a ton. I love them. Not everybody needs to use them everywhere, but I use them all the time. A lot of my original songs and things will use these hammer-ons and pull-offs to create these sounds that are really unlike other instruments. You know, it sounds a lot like a guitar, but it'd be tough to hear a piano make this sort of sound where it's just that really unique type of sound. A guitarist who I love to listen to named Tommy Emmanuel really uses these a lot, and that's where I kind of ripped it all off from. But anyways, that's hammer-ons and pull-offs kind of in a nutshell being used. But what's cool is we've got this whole big embellishment etude now at the bottom of the screen here. And this is the thing that I'm most excited about, because what it is it's combining what we learned in our previous session along with these techniques here. And it does so in a way that's not actually that bad. It's not that hard. It is challenging, but you'll notice in this, there's 2 pull-offs. One of them's here, one of them's here. 2 hammer-ons, one's here and one's here, and 4 slides, one on each one of these measures. Now, if you're looking at this and still a little confused, remember that the line tied here with the little SL meant slide, which we learned about in our last session. If you have 2 things with a tie above them like that, that's going to tell you it's either a hammer-on or a pull-off, and most tab programs will actually tell you P for pull-off or H for hammer-on, and so that's how you can know those are those techniques. Otherwise, if there's no P or H listed, you still can know just by the direction. So if you're going from 7 to 5, you know that's going down, and that's going to use a pull-off. If you're going from 1 to 3, you know that's going up, and it uses a hammer-on. But let's go ahead and try looking at this beginning etude piece, and let's think about it from how we worked on it last time. So last time when we played this, we kind of we just slid one finger down. But now we've got some pull-offs. So we have to think more carefully about how we are going to approach playing this. Remember, we want to always look at the note that we're going to. So we're starting on the 7 and we're going to a 5. Because of that, we want to make sure that we're playing it in a way that allows us to set up that 5 really well. This 5 being played with your index finger means that your ring finger is a great fit there on the 7. So we'll start by playing the 0 on the G, C, and E strings. And then we're going to have our ring finger here, and we're going to do 7 on the A. Then we're going to do a pull off. And then we're going to play that 5 on the A, and then slide it down to 3. So it goes something like this. Now you hear how nice that is? It's more expressive, right? Listen to this. That's not expressive, right? That's just clunk, clunk, clunk. But this, much more expressive, right? Now, you could flip-flop them if you wanted to, right? You could actually do the slide first if you wanted to, and then do the pull-off. That's kind of neat. You could even just play it once and do all the techniques, and kind of let these ring into each other. It doesn't work great, but it's fun to kind of experiment with this to create these different sounds. Then when we go to this next measure here, it's just the same thing. It's going to do that pull off followed by the slide. So it goes through. And now as we go on to the next pair here, a little bit more interesting, we're going to be using hammer-ons, and now we're going to be using it on the E string, which is something we haven't done yet. So we're going to take that index finger, place it on the first fret of the E string, strum your C, E, and E to get C, G, and E, G, C, and E, wow. Strum all these 3 strings together, and then we're going to play that 1, and we're going to hammer on to 3 on the E. Now doing hammer-ons on an interior string can sometimes be hard. Here's a little trick. If this ring finger touches the A string, it's okay in this particular sequence because we're not playing the A string yet. So if you're trying to get so hard here that your accuracy and your power wavers, it's okay to be a little bit more relaxed, still using very much the tip of the finger, but if that A string is touched by that ring finger, it's really not a big deal. And then we're going to slide with that ring finger from 3 to 5. And then we strum through all 4 strings. And what's cool is it's the same thing a second time. And you can mix it up again. So I could start with the slide if I wanted to, right? So, and And then I did the slide there, right? You can mix it up, match it any ways that you kind of want. It's the same exact melody that we learned in our last session, just now incorporating some slides and hammers. And then the end sequence is very, very easy because I believe in ending on simple notes because that's just makes life so much easier, doesn't it, right? But if you wanted to, you could slide or do some like hammer-ons. You could do all sorts of different stuff. And that's the real trick with this whole concept is as you practice it, eventually you don't think as much as you do. And that's where it really gets fun, is you're just able to utilize these techniques to transition between different notes. So that you can hear it though, here's the whole embellishment etude. Should sound something like this. And just like the last one, it sounds best when you repeat it. And there is our sort of little etude that you can be working on to get comfortable with this technique and using it kind of in a variety of ways. And so now we're going to open up to any questions you guys might have on these techniques and maybe slides or other things too. All three of these techniques, slides, hammer-ons, and pull-offs, I would say I use every single time I pick up a ukulele and play. There's never a time I don't use it. Even if I'm playing C, F, and G, I'm usually going to be playing like C. I'll do something like a hammer-on into the F or into the G, or a pull-off in some ways, or a slide into it. I can't not use these techniques. They're so much fun. So I hope this has helped, unlock some of these. But does anybody have any questions with any of these techniques? Yeah, Mary.
All right. Well, I'm working on, not going very well. Chord Melody for Let It Be for Steven on RC 101, right? Mm-hmm. There's one chord. I think it's the A minor 7 up the neck. So 7, 8, 9. And then I'm supposed to hammer on with my pinky and then slide to 12.
Woof! Yeah. That's a bit much, isn't it? Yeah. So something like
there's another one where it's 7, 7, 10, and do the pull-off. So all these techniques that you just showing us are in there.
Yeah, and those are tough places to start working with these techniques, which can certainly be frustrating. And so if you're ever working on something where the technique is used in a way that you're just not quite ready for yet, you can always get rid of the technique. So like in this particular case, get really comfortable playing these notes kind of on their own. Just like that. And that will build the comfort to be able to do the slides and the hammer-ons and the pull-offs, because what it does is it gives you muscle memory of where those fingers should sort of arrive. As you get into the smaller spaces up the neck, it's really easy to overshoot or undershoot, and it looks like it's like, oh no, that wasn't right at all, right? But sitting there and just playing the techniques on their own, just like that. So I'm not doing any hammer-ons or slides. I'm just getting comfortable, getting that movement. And then get comfortable with one thing where it's like maybe just that hammer on, and don't even worry about the slide yet. And then from there, right? If you're doing both at the same time, woof, that's a monster. One of the things about this stuff too is, just knowing when it can be used well. And this high on the fretboard, it's very difficult to do both together. So maybe cut them in half, right? Where you do the hammer on and then you play again and do the slide up to 12, right? That can certainly make it easier. Another trick is usually these techniques are used by electric players because they just have to blow on the string and it will make a sound. We have to do a lot more to make a sound come out of our instrument. So if you can plug in and play on an amp, you'll notice, wow, this stuff is much easier. And that's why electric guitarists can do hammer-ons and pull-offs so well and so easily. But most electric guitarists, if you hand them an acoustic ukulele and you ask them to do their really advanced hammer-ons, pull-offs, most of them can't do it because it's just so much more difficult. It's like the difference between, a self-propelled lawnmower up a hill and an old school push, right? Yes, at the end of the day, they're both cutting grass, but they're going about it in some different ways. So it can definitely add to that challenge. But yeah, I would try isolating those without the techniques and then gradually incorporate them back in as you're comfortable going up to that 10 and that 12, because that's a tough area. So looks like we've got a couple things in the chat, which is good. Hi, Matt. Is a PDF available for this lesson? Thanks. Yes, there will be. So if you're watching this as a recording, the PDF, I'm sure, will be linked in the description. Otherwise, this will be sent with the recording of this. You'll be included a PDF with that email. So yes, you'll absolutely have a PDF for this lesson to work through those different techniques. And so are there any other questions at all? No questions? No worries. When there are no questions, I always think one of two things has happened. Either option one, I explained it so well that people have questions, which is cool. Or option two, I lost everybody and they don't it's like not even worth trying to recover from. So I hope it's not that one. But thank you guys so much for coming to this this session. In our next sessions, we're going to be going down a little bit of a rabbit hole on some music theory and learning chord shapes and moving them. The way that I teach this stuff is really trying to be more applicable rather than, more practical rather than just theoretical. And so we don't need to learn a lot of music theory to start learning how chords can move up and down the fretboard. So I'll look forward to seeing you guys all there. But otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I will see you guys soon, and take it easy. Thanks so much. La 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 la.